Thank you. Our next question is from Warren McIntyre. Warren asks, in a group activity, how do you stop one or more members doing nothing and just riding the wave of the others' work?
I think you have to really check whether they are doing nothing or are they just listening. Not all learners, when they participate, actually actively say things. We would all like them to because we want to know what's inside their heads. But you do get some students, both weak and strong students, who are thinking, listening and thinking and working out their ideas. So what I would tend to do is, as I was going around and noticing that a couple of times, maybe just occasionally sort of asking a particular student, what did they think of what the previous student has said, or can you add to what somebody has said? Those sorts of subsidiary questions that we use all the time in an assessment for learning classroom, because that's what will actually help you to know that they actually are keeping up with the learning that's going on. And if they are sort of falling asleep, it just gives them that jolt to move them forwards. You see teachers using that a lot in the classroom. But then, they can join in with the differentiated approach, even if they're not actively talking in the classroom. They still might be following the ideas. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you. So there you go, Warren. So some ideas about how to use questioning. I don't know if you've heard or looked at, Warren, but there's also stuff, Kagan has got quite a lot of group work activities that make sure that everybody is participating at the same time and has equal responsibility to simultaneously support the group work. But as Chris said, it's about the activity, that these are strategies that might help. So if you Google Kagan, you'll get some ideas on there that will support, as Chris says, your use of going around then and using your questioning to deepen their learning and involve more. Okay, so next.
Kim Lawler asks whether it would be useful to identify key points in a topic or subject and include hinge point questions or other assessment for learning techniques in medium-term planning in order to facilitate progress, rather than just focusing on lessons. I think absolutely. I think I see a sequence of nested intervals. So minute by minute, a teacher might be using a hinge point in the middle of a lesson, but maybe after a week's worth of teaching, there's another checkpoint, a key conceptual barrier, if you like, things that we know that students find difficult. And we check to find out whether the students have reached that. And then maybe every 2 or 3 weeks, we have an even bigger checkpoint where we actually expect students to synthesize materials from across different parts of the topic or the unit. So I think that what we need to see are appropriate cycles, short, medium, and longer term cycles, and requiring students to accumulate knowledge. And all of these things can be useful. It is worth saying, though, that our experience and our evidence, which is not as strong as we'd like it to be, but the evidence that we do have suggests the biggest impact happens when the cycle of assessment, evaluation or interpretation and taking follow-up action is as short as possible. So it does seem that the minute-by-minute formative assessment cycles have the greatest impact on student learning.
Next we have got Sonia Stocks, and Sonia asks, assessing the success of differentiation is an interesting one. So she can see if the students have improved, which I think is interesting as well, but there are so many different techniques. She's wondering about whether or not she chose the appropriate one. How would she know?
Yeah, well, I think you've got the key to what you want to do, and that is to be checking on have individuals improved. That's really where assessment should be focused. We talk about assessment being ipsative. This means getting children to compare themselves with their previous performance. So, am I getting better at being systematic in the way that I work in science? Or am I getting better at checking for errors when I open up the brackets in an equation? It's those sorts of things that really we need to focus on, and students should be aware of that. So, anything that helps you and the student look at their improvement and their progress is important. Clearly, occasionally, parents, head teachers, maybe inspectors want us to look across the class and compare one student's performance with another. There's loads of tests around for that. Just use tests for that sort of thing, because that's just a check every now and again. Whereas when you're looking at improvement, that's when you're going for that more detailed information about their learning. that will help you plan what you're going to do next. That's the formative part of it. And do the occasional summative just to satisfy those who want that accountability issue dealt with.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Sonia. So moving on, we have a question from Judy Sarah. Judy is saying, and she teaches lots of different groups with different students that she sees twice a week. Her question is, do we have any ideas about how you keep track of each learner's journey? And I think this is sometimes where we end up with the tail that wags the dog and teachers spending hours keeping track of it, whereas you're saying the important thing is the progress in the learning.
Yeah.
So have you got any top tips for that or any thoughts for Judy?
Well, having recently been at an Association for Science Education conference and seen some of my primary colleagues explaining how they're keeping track of how students are doing, performing on the national curriculum, now that we've moved into a new system of assessment in England, assessment without levels. What they're saying is that you just record students who are not quite there. So you just accept that if you've got a register or you've got a mark book, electronic or on paper, that the students have got there, unless you've actually recorded something about what they need to do in order to get there. So you're just recording really what you need to work on with the students. This is the critical part of it. And then you might have the occasional student who does something phenomenal and exceptional. You might want to record that as well, because it might be nice. So you can remember to put it on the school report or tell their parents at the school gate or whatever it is that's there. But it's whatever you need for that sort of thing. And when you just look back at that over a couple of days, if you're a primary teacher or if you're a secondary teacher, over a couple of weeks, and see on the occasions you've met students, there's information about individuals. And then if there's somebody that you particularly feel you've not noticed, then that's who you look at the next lesson and collect data on that. And gradually building it up in a sort of more piecemeal jigsaw way like that, you start to build a picture of the whole class as well as catering for those individual needs, which is what you're trying to do as a teacher.
That's great, thank you. So thank you, Judy. It's definitely something I think a lot of teachers spend a lot of time thinking about. For me, I've been thinking about it recently, and I think it's less tracking and it's more mapping.
Yeah.
It's what can they or can't they do, which is what Chris is saying.
Yeah.
And actually thinking about how you respond to that over time and help support them.
And that fits in with what your expectations are. What would you expect a 13-year-old to be able to do if they're doing, say, a Hooke's Law experiment? Should they be able to actually draw the scale on the graph themselves? Should they be able to measure an extension, or will they need help with that? You make your decisions about where you'd expect a 13-year-old to be, and then you can record those who are not quite there yet and what help they need to get there.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you, Chris. Okay, thank you, Judy. Moving on to a question from Anne Wolf. Anne asks, because she works in a rural area. She talks about being a recently qualified primary teacher, but Anne, I don't think you're on your own with this one. I think she's talking about classes where she's got multi-age children in there in a remote and rural area. How does that work when you've got such a wide age range of children that you're teaching?
Yeah, I mean, hats off to these teachers. I've seen some in some areas of Scotland and some areas of Wales who've got these small multi-age classrooms. And really what I see them doing is they might be doing similar topics, but the teachers have already worked out very carefully what they'd expect from the 9-year-old compared to the 7-year-old. And so there's sort of different outcomes for those different ages. But at the same time, they can support one another because they're at different stages in their own cognitive development, in their own experience of working with others. So you sometimes get some mini teachers of the older children with the younger children. And, using those sorts of activities in the classroom that engage different age groups can help with that. I certainly think that those sorts of teachers really know their kids well, partly because they're small numbers in the classroom, but also because they actually see them not just through their own eyes as teachers, but through the eyes of the other children. And it's quite interesting the different sort of ideas you get about children's competence when you see them being prompted or scaffolded actually by, say, somebody who's just a year or two older. as to what they can do, because the language that they use with one another is actually sometimes far better at prompting ideas than what we do as teachers, even if we try and get our language level down to student level. So make the most of what you've got, and let us know things that work, because what works in your classroom, even though it's a very different context to many other teachers' classrooms, can help us see different ways of working.
Absolutely. Some of the reading I've been doing around differentiating was talking about education in the past used to be classrooms of children's of lots of different ages, primary and secondary. But as schools have got bigger, we've become less empowered to differentiate and start treating our students as homogenous groups.
Yeah.
So as Chris says, as somebody who's working in a school like that, you're going to develop some amazing differentiating skills. Do share them with us as you're doing that, and relish that challenge, because you'll get to know your learners really well and move them forward. And it's something that those of us who are teaching students who are the same age in a class together actually lose those skills of. So it's part of a learning journey for you, being a recently qualified.
I think also music teachers are very good at this, and musicians in general. You often find, my daughter used to play in an orchestra, and you would often find, even when she was only 11, she'd be playing alongside students who were 18, 16 or so on. And just the way that they treat one another and help move one another along, and can actually work together, really shows what can be done in a mixed age group session. And the sort of teachers or conductors who run those sorts of sessions as musicians have got a very, very good way of helping them to collaborate, and maybe we can learn from that as well.
Absolutely. So thank you very much for that question, Anne. Moving on, Rebecca asks, she'd like to know, we were talking about early years actually, Rebecca. She'd like to know more about this way of working in early years, successful examples, videos, blogs, etc.
Oh, I'm not a specialist in early years. I've got colleagues that are. If you're in England, people like Esme Glower at the Institute of Education, or Sally Howard, who's at Oxford Brookes University. I'm sure there's lots of other experts with early years that are around. But early years, we all say, and it's true, most teachers of early years are very, very good at differentiating. They look at the individual child, and they look at the developmental paths, and on a day-to-day basis, not just the teacher, but all the adults who deal with that children, TAs onwards, actually are recognising what the child's doing as it's moving forward with its learning, and noting that, and they have big discussions about it. You just need to go and watch, and I'm sure there are somewhere you live, some good primary early years teachers, because they just really can do differentiation so great, and you'll pick up lots of ideas from just talking to them. But I'm sure there are lots of things on the net, or if not, find somebody that's an early years specialist like Esme or Sally that I said, and they can direct you towards the books and videos you need to look at.
Absolutely. And I'm sure the National STEM Learning Centre run an early years course. I'm sure there's the CPD providers out there who run courses. I have to say, Paul Guinness, who wrote the Teacher's Toolkit, I was lucky enough to get to know and meet before he sadly passed on. He used to say that when he wanted some personal professional development on differentiation, if he wanted to think about it and refresh himself, he would go and watch early years.
Yeah.
It really is an amazing place to go. And just as Chris says, observe those teachers, how they use the children as learning resources for each other, how they use the other adults, how they use the activities. It's a fantastic way to go and refresh yourself.
How they model what they expect from the kids. And then the kids can actually tell you what it is that they need to do to move forward. It's quite amazing, actually, in an early years classroom.
It is. So thank you very much for that question. Moving on.
Louise Denton asks for examples of how differentiation is used in classrooms of children 7 to 12 years old during maths lessons. Are there specific differentiation strategies that are effective specifically in mathematics teaching? And I would say no, we don't have any evidence that there are some techniques that are only effective in mathematics classrooms. But I think the general principles are reasonably straightforward. So we have differentiation by task, differentiation by outcome. And it's important to realise that differentiation by task can actually merge into differentiation by outcome if the tasks are well designed. Let me give you an example from middle school mathematics. So typically in the UK or the US, if a teacher is introducing a class to the idea of areas of a trapezium, then What the teacher will do typically is to explain the rule to students, do a worked example, and then students will do 20 or so examples in their seats as consolidation practice. In Japan, it's very common for a teacher to introduce one method of finding the area of trapezium, draw a parallel line between the two parallels of the trapezium, slice the trapezium along that line, flip the top half over to the bottom, you get a parallelogram. The base of the parallelogram is a plus b, the height of the parallelogram is half h. And so there's one way of finding the area of a trapezium. The class is then asked, working in pairs or groups, to find as many conceptually distinct ways of finding the area of a trapezium. And some of them are very straightforward, some of them are much more complex, and there's one involving areas of similar triangles where you complete the triangle and then use properties of similar triangles to subtract the area of the smaller triangle off the larger triangle. That involves some quite complex algebraic manipulation to show that the formula you get is the same as the formula you get with every other method. And so what the teacher can do is the students set to work, the teacher can go around the class, and then the teacher might challenge one group by giving them a push or a nudge towards finding the one that involves similar triangles, for example. You might say, you found 4 or 5 of these, there are actually lots more. See how many you could find. What is really interesting is that very few mathematics teachers in England or the United States know how many there are. And most Japanese mathematics teachers know there are exactly 13 conceptually distinct ways of finding the area of a trapezium. That's quite an interesting example where ultimately it becomes differentiation by task because the teacher pushes students towards finding one target or another within the same framework. So it's an inclusive model of differentiation. And I think that's the crucial idea. The idea is that we are engaging all the students as far as possible in the same task, but finding ways to create challenge for some students within that same task.
Now a question from Kim Lawler. Kim is asking, would it be useful to identify key points in a topic subject and include hinge point questions or other assessment for learning techniques in medium-term planning in order to facilitate progress, rather than focusing on just individual lessons?
Guess that one is yes. But you're asking a lot of yourself in terms of workload. So if you've not done a lot of differentiating before, I'd say try it out in a couple of lessons, get it working, get your students used to that way of working. And then, as you come to that topic again, or as you come to your next topic with those students at the stage that they're at, think more carefully about your planning and maybe plan for bigger chunks, maybe for more medium-term planning. But it's getting that balance right between what you need in order to make that next experience for learners successful in terms of their learning, and thinking ahead as to where they're going, because they might suddenly speed ahead and your medium-term planning might go out the window, or they might get held up and stuck on something, and overcoming that hurdle might take a while and might require some of them to take a different track to get there. So medium-term planning is good, but it's got to be able to be adaptable according to how your learners are going. All right, so you have to sort that out for yourself, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you, Kim. And as Chris said earlier, doing that, if you've got the opportunity, if you co-plan with somebody, you can start questioning the purpose of your assessments and what it's showing you in terms of your children's progress. And as Chris said, then you have that professional dialogue about how do we improve the learning from the planning that we're doing. So I would,
make a note of it for yourself for next year as well, because when I was a teacher, I'd come around to certain topics every year and think, that's the mistake I made last year and I've done it again. So, unless you've got a terrific memory, making a note, and that will inform your planning for the next year.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Kim. That's Claire Thomas, who says, stupid question alert, but we don't, all questions valid, Claire, thank you very much. I'm going to try and distill this down. So she's talking about in a perfect DFL classroom, should she be thinking across in a lesson or a series of lessons, should she be thinking along the lines in terms of the learning of all, most or some, or how does she differentiate to support the students to move on, or does she just accept at some points that some of the students are not going to do, get it?
What you've got to do is make sure that all students can access in. So there'll be some activities that all students can do. So the all I don't mind It's the sum and whatever the other one is that I do mind. So all we'll be able to do the main activities, those main building blocks that we've talked about in science or in technology or in mathematics. It might be that they don't actually remember as much as others. It might be that they don't get as far as one another's at developing some particular skill. But if you were to pick up this same or a similar piece of learning or the next piece of learning that was related to that one, your students should be able to access in and connect with what you've been doing over the last few lessons. So that's what you need to look for. You're trying to build up for them a picture and understanding of how science or mathematics or technology plays out for that topic and how it relates to their next pieces of learning. If they can do that, that's good enough. All right, we're not saying that all children will learn everything the same and be at the same point at the same time. All right, they will do it differently, but what you've got to accept is that they're all capable of actually having a go at things and actually improving, and that's what you're working on in the differentiated classroom.
Yeah, thank you. And I know that because I've listened to some of Dylan's responses, and he was asked a very similar question by somebody else there, Claire, and Dylan was saying that, as Chris has said, they're all working towards the same learning intention. However, you may differentiate your success criteria. As Chris said, they may get to different points, but actually they all do that learning intention. And that's what, again, we were modelling with our PACE lesson in particular. I'm just thinking all the students were doubling, but they, some were practicing because they hadn't fully understood it. Some were then applying. Some were correcting the teacher so they could actually spot patterns. And then others were doing an extended project. They were all doing the same learning intention, but not necessarily the same activity. So I hope that answers that for you, Claire. Thank you very much. Now looking at Emma Sarker's question.
Yeah.
She's talking about differentiation and scaffolding. She said that she used to think that they were synonymous with each other, but she started to dawn on her that they're different strategies. What is the difference between scaffolding and differentiation?
Well, you've picked on one of my favourite things to talk about, Emma. I've just been writing about this because I think scaffolding is one of the most misused of all the terms that you hear teachers say. Teachers are always telling me they're scaffold, and I always ask them, so what have you done and what effect has it had? Because scaffolding is very much about helping students to really examine and to perhaps really reshape their emerging ideas. So you scaffold once students start talking about their understanding of something. And you do this in order that they can then enter into conversation with other students and compare their emerging ideas with the emerging ideas of other students to help develop and take that idea forward. They wouldn't be able to do this unless you were there with the prompts and probes, probably, that's pushing them forward to do that. Because that then takes forward not just their learning, but the learning of other students. What you've got to be able to do is decide on the point when you start dismantling your scaffolding. It's somebody called P in 2004 wrote about fading. This is when you start removing the parts of the scaffold so they can start to do this, keep that understanding and move that understanding forward without you doing those prompts and probes. So it's a very skilled type of work from a teacher. Sometimes teachers get it wrong and they give hints and clues towards the correct answer. That's not what you're doing with scaffolding. All right, that's really, you're shortcutting and preventing those learners going through that difficult mire they need to go through in order to realise which of their ideas are incorrect and which of their ideas are really taking them forward and helping them connect things in science, in mathematics and technology. So, getting scaffolding right, it is hard to do. So thank you for asking that one, because it's one that I'm really keen on trying to clear up for teachers. I mean, the great thing about it is that you end up with students who've got ownership of their learning. Whereas if you don't scaffold properly and you just tell them the answer, they just try and remember it, just try and recall it. And recall's not a very effective method of taking learning forward. If they can construct their understanding because you're scaffolding, they take that forward into their next bit of learning, they've got ownership and they move on. All right. If they're doing memory, then they're always going to be chasing you as a teacher, and eventually you want them to learn without you being there.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you, Chris. And that links again.
It's a long one, sorry.
No, that's good. I can tell.
My
passionate
passionate ones.
Yeah. It links very much to what Dylan has said in a couple of his responses as well about the metacognition, that we don't always teach our learners how they learn.
Yeah.
I know my PhD thesis, I'm asking students, how do you know you've learned something today? The more honest answer I get more often than not is I don't know.
Yeah.
They say they don't know. And if they are, as Chris says, they're just saying, because I can remember it, if somebody asks me, I can tell them it again.
Yeah.
But they don't understand that that's not learning. It's
Can they recognise that they've learned something, and then can they talk about it with somebody else? So it's not just that I've learned forces. What have you learnt about force? Can you talk to somebody else about it? And then, can you start thinking about what was easy and what was difficult in doing that? So mapping the strategies and the ideas as they were going through. And then eventually looking at, and so how is this helping me learn, looking in a broader sense at it. All 4 of those ways of doing it are really what you need in the classroom. And I know there's not a lot of time in the classroom to do that, teachers, but if you can get through some of those some of the time, you're going to help your students learn better.
Absolutely, and as Chris said, ultimately be able to help themselves.
Yeah.
So when they do get to a stage in education where they step up, in England it's up to at 16, where they step up to A level, and there's a lot more responsibility on themselves to learn. They will have those strategies within themselves to be successful. My children are at an age where I see lots of their friends dropping out of education because they just don't know how to help themselves get unstuck.
Yeah.
And that's what we really want them to be.
Yeah.
These lifelong learners.
When they go to university age 18 in England, you get a dropout again, and that's because they've not got teachers behind them. And it's because they've not learnt those learning skills. So you must help them with their learning skills, as well as teach them the topics.
So scaffolding, it's needed.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you, Emma. That was a great one. So, and then we have a question here from Paul Martin. Paul is saying that he finds differentiation possible in revision lessons. However, when he's introducing new concepts or delivering new ideas, he finds it very hard to differentiate. He finds it difficult to assess because the ideas are new and they're all still unsure, and for the same reason, when confronted with self-guiding, they practically all choose the low ability tasks. Any thoughts?
A lot of thoughts, Paul. They don't come to you as empty vessels. They'll have some ideas, right? Even if those ideas are totally way off what you actually want them to think, but they will bring ideas to your lesson. There'll be a whole range of them because they've had different experiences within their lives, within their schooling, and so you need to assess early on in order to take forward that they're learning. So, assessing early on is that at the revision stage, it's a bit late by then. It's almost like saying, okay, you're all right, but you've got a few errors. I'm going to stick sticking plasters over those. That's not really the best way to go about it. I think, assessing at regular intervals all the way through, but particularly at the beginning, is key.
Yeah. It links very nicely, Paul, to what Chris is saying, to the blog that Dylan has written that he wrote to complement the course, where he says that he quotes, I can't remember the researcher, Ausbell, that if we can ascertain what students do or do not know and teach them accordingly, then they're going to make the best progress. So as Chris says, revision lessons, too late for that. Find out what they know at the start, and then, as Chris has said, to other answers, respond to that information and do things different.
I mean, I remember back on our very first assessment for learning project, the one we did in Medway in Oxfordshire, one of the teachers gave the students the test they were going to do on light, and they didn't have to answer it. They just had to put a green dot if they thought they could answer those questions, a red dot if they got no idea and they hadn't about refraction, and an orange dot if they thought they knew something about that but they weren't sure they could get the right answer. And he just used that information to plan. He planned to teach them the orange bits first, then bring in the reds, and then just do a quick check on the green, give them a test, and hey, they learnt that topic so much better than the students the previous year when he hadn't used that approach. So knowing where to take them, because they've given you that information, really does save you time and really helps them to sort of realise how they're moving forward. They understand that, that was orange before, now it's green, I can do this now.
Yeah. So thank you, Paul. And again, our sister course, the Assessment for Learning in STEM Teaching course, gives lots of ideas, as Chris just has, about how you can diagnose and find out where they're at. So hopefully it'll build your repertoire, and from that assessment you can then differentiate. Yeah. So good luck with it, and it is difficult. We are aware of that, and it does take time, but good luck with persisting, and I hope that helps. So thank you very much.
Okay.
Teresa Screm, here we've got a long question.
Yeah.
I think what's at the hub of Teresa's question is it she's starting to get some clarity of what differentiation is, and she's starting to believe in herself that she can do it from doing the course. That's fantastic, Teresa. But she was just asking a question: is she right in saying that all learners should be trying to achieve the same learning objective, and is the learning objective the same as the learning intention? I'm nothing.
Yeah, I think Andrea answered this one earlier. I mean, they need the same learning intention. The learning objective, yeah, I mean, the learning objective will include possibly the way they go about it, and they may go about it differently with differentiation. So that's a sort of possible yes, but certainly the learning intention should be the same. We want them all to be able to, construct graphs using a table of simple data. So yeah, that working on that, but you might actually have different types of data as they get better at it for some of them, and others will just be practicing similar things. You might, for some of those, be helping them draw the scale if the scale is difficult on a graph. There's different ways through to actually do that, but what you're hoping is they're all achieving something similar in terms of taking their learning forward. So they're actually getting through the curriculum, they're dealing with the skills, they're starting to access the concepts, and they're starting to develop their understanding of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So thank you, Teresa. Teresa asked at the end of her question, what was the learning objective on the board at the start of the bonding lesson or the Sankey diagram lesson? How was it worded? In all honesty, Teresa, I cannot remember, but I am going to ask Paul as our host to make a note of that question. And as we go through to our second version, we could maybe add that information in for future teachers. So thank you for raising that for us. We will look at that in the future. Okay, so moving on to Jesme and Ibekiwe. This question here is about the quadrant tool that we used, and they're asking, how does the teacher handle 4 different activities going on in the classroom at the same time, which is similar to the question we had earlier about how do I cope with it when I'm the only one in the room?
I think you probably, if you know your kids well, will know that where quite a number of them are likely to be starting. So will they be starting on the P, the practice, or will they be starting on the correction or whatever? So you might be able to anticipate in advance, and so you have things ready just to hand to them and they can actually get on with it. Sometimes thinking about where you seat your kids, I'm not saying change it for that lesson, but maybe building up to that lesson, you're thinking about which groups are likely to be good at working together and students that are good at working together. And so that actually gets settled quite quickly. And then those students who need that extra bit from you to chivvy them to get going or to help them access in to get going, you've got time to deal with that. So it's just the normal sort of planning for good teaching that you normally have to do. You're always multitasking as a teacher. But one of the things that you can do once they get going with the activities is you can step back and just survey and have a look at how they're all doing. And don't just go in and intervene quickly. Sometimes we all make that mistake as teachers and think, I've got to be busy, I've got to go and help this group. Sometimes they can just be getting on with it, and you just have a good look at how they're getting on with it, look over their shoulders to see how they're doing, and maybe even if they're making a few mistakes or not doing it quite as you'd want them to, thinking for a little while about how you might take that forward, because it might be you want to work with that individual to take it forward, or you might notice several students making similar errors, and so you either do that by drawing that group together, or maybe even by putting it up on the board and getting others in the group to actually help those particular students to move forward. Yeah, so it's being strategic, but giving yourself time to plan, because that's one of the most important things to do as a teacher. Don't rush in. Try and find some time to do some thinking and some planning as well. Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jesme, thank you for that question. So we're coming to the...
Michael Tonkin asks whether anybody has ideas for differentiation in a workshop environment, where one has a range of students designing and manufacturing projects in both wood and metalwork, or a combination of both. And the answer is, I don't think we do, because you're already doing it. So I think in any subject where the standard form of interaction is the teacher wandering around, interacting with students individually about their work, very common in technology, very common in art, very common in writing, in English, for example, then you're already doing it. Those interactions are differentiated. You are treating each student as a unique individual. Indeed, one can think of differentiation as a way of trying to bring the best features of one-to-one teaching into a group teaching context. So I think that, in my experience, most technology teaching already differentiates very effectively. The challenge, of course, is making sure the tasks that students are engaged in are rich enough to push them, and that is a matter of some difficulty. It takes a great deal of teacher skill to make sure that students are pushing themselves when the teacher isn't checking up on what they're doing.
The end then of the questions that we've had submitted that we've had the opportunity to look at. For those of you who've submitted questions that we've not had an opportunity to respond to, we will, we've still got another 10 days of the course to go, so we will be looking at those questions within the content of the course and trying to respond to those as well, just to make sure that everybody feels that their questions have been addressed. So don't worry if we've not managed to pick it up today in the question and answer, but thank you very much for your questions. Again, this is kind of like my little thing at the end, is just to, I think there's been some themes coming out. I think the key thing for me from what Chris has been saying and also what Dylan has been saying is that as teachers, we are the key agent in that classroom for getting every student to make progress. And it's how we draw on our skills and how, as Chris says, we plan for the learning and plan for our learners that is going to make that biggest impact and difference. So it's about knowing your students, it's about increasing their ownership over time for their learning, but also for understanding about how they learn and go about learning and building that for them, and then responding to that and tailoring what we do for the students, building that classroom culture where they're going to choose the challenge because they know that they learn, giving them that guidance, and then thinking about how we're using the assessment information that we're getting, the evidence that we're eliciting, so that we actually respond to it. And Chris's idea that you don't have to record everything, but you need to record where the significant points are for you as a teacher, where you need to then take action and use your time and your planning to make a difference. And so, you know, it's that assessment for learning is at the heart of this, that you can't differentiate effectively unless you're using formative practices well, and that it's going to take time. I think that's come out. It's going to take time. It's going to take critical reflection from us as professionals, thinking about our practice and what we're doing, and then that we'll respond and think about that when we're planning. So the time is that reflecting and planning so that we can make the biggest difference for those students in that classroom, and so that they all make progress. Not necessarily the same progress, but they all make progress and understanding. Okay, so thank you very much, Chris.
Great summary.
Thank you, everybody, for your questions. I'm sure you're going to get a lot out of this. I know that the online course will get so much out of the threads when you're reflecting with each other. You get so much out of the videos of Chris and Dylan, so much out of seeing our teachers who are amazing, practice ideas in the classroom. But it's really good to be able to have this Q&A session because it gives us a chance to respond, not quite live, but not far off in terms of the questions that you're raising as we go through. So we really do appreciate you submitting these, and for Chris and Dylan's time. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy listening.
Okay, bye. Keep differentiating.
Yeah, keep practicing.